liner length and stick it through the damper and push the fireplace in. When they do that, they're supposed to block off around the liner at the damper. Called a direct connect is the technical jargon. And that's directly connecting the stove to the chimney through the damper. You're supposed to seal it off. I don't like that. It makes the stove hard to service. You can't do a sweep on the chimney with a direct connect without, you can't, unless you pull the whole system out, there's no way you can clean the smoke shelf, which is, this area of the chimney here, if the liner stops. Most of your liners, a good installed, preferable way is to go all the way to the top of the chimney. And then there's pour-in liners. You won't see those in Texas too often. I know some places in the northeast especially do that, but they basically put an inflatable bladder down the chimney and they pour in an insulated cement mix, like a perlite vermiculite mixed with a Portland mixed cement around the liner, around this bladder, then deflate it and pull it out. So usually that's restoring a chimney back to safe use. The liner manufacturer will do testing on their liner and say, so if you don't know, if you think you've got combustible construction too close or wasn't built, the UL listing on some of these liners will make it a zero clearance chimney. But you're not going to see a lot of that in Texas. At least I don't.
Concrete, would he have to mark that chimney that he's done that in any way?
No, you'd probably, it'd kind of be one of those things that, a trained eye'd see it. I'd look in there and say, what is this? Probably, and have to scratch my head for a minute because I just don't see them. The thing is, when you put a liner in a chimney, you're essentially shrinking the size of the flue. Yeah. And in a fireplace, your ratio on average to an open fireplace is the area of the opening, the height times the width, is your square inches of area. Usually your chimney's flue needs to be about 1/10, not much bigger, not much smaller for it to draft correctly. So when you put a liner, you shrink the size of the flue, so usually modifications to the fireplace need to be made. I do a restoration system called Air and Fire, and we tear out the firebox, pull out the damper assembly, and we take detailed measurements, and a company casts these big refractory pieces. We put a throat assembly up in the fireplace connected to a liner, and then assemble this firebox. So now the measurements I took match my liner. Everything works good, and most folks, that's a higher cost alternative than just getting a nice quality wood insert. But there's some people that's the way they go. So most liners you'll see modifications done to the fireplace and throat. When you're looking at masonry chimney, what I see a lot too, especially with home inspections, I get called out. I'm a vendor for a lot of realtors. We'll get called out, and there's a lot of things that are superficial that are getting red flagged, but then there's things that I see overlooked a lot. And the biggest things, when you're looking, there's level of cleanliness. Check the lintel. Behind the lintel, if there's any gaps there. And when you look through your damper, you shouldn't see any big gaps or voids. A smoke chamber or a chimney built properly, the area above the damper, you really shouldn't see a lot of exposed brick and mortar on those corbels. A lot of times they should parge that, and that's coating that brick and mortar with a super cement so that the flue gases can be caustic to standard bricks and mortar. So there's certain materials that are supposed to be used. But again, there's no testing standard, so you really can't, you don't want to condemn people because stuff that's been built, you need to bring it to their attention. And then, homeowners don't know their hearth systems need regular maintenance and evaluation. But the biggest thing you can do in a masonry chimney is make sure that there's no gaps and voids, and that everything is in good condition.
What about the refractory panel?
Refractory panels on metal fireplaces, we get a lot of calls for that. And generally the rule for that is if there is hairline cracks in those panels, it's really superficial. If the panel's falling apart or has gaps about 1/8 inch or bigger, you really should replace the panel. I was in a class for a fireplace manufacturer a while back who said that their fireplaces are tested safe with the panels removed. Not that you'd want to burn it that way, but the purpose of those panels in a lot of situations is decorative and to help the fireplace radiate heat and look more like a fireplace.
So it's not a big deal if there's a crack?
If it's a hairline crack, it's superficial. If it's I'd say more. If you could stick a credit card in it, it probably needs to be replaced. Or really, you just note any damage, hairline cracks in the refractory panel. Doesn't hurt to do that, but because they're all tested differently. So one manufacturer.
You say replace, they can be repaired too.
Generally, you can't repair them. There's furnace cements and refractory cements that we can put on them, but they won't bond right, and usually they'll fall off. And that's a free-floating panel. Usually what breaks the panels are overzealous poker use, or the panel was green. A lot of times the panel's still wet from the factory, and then they overfire the fireplace the first use. If you have a new fireplace, you should heat it up slowly on the first fire and cure those panels. But there's replacement panels available, usually like a back wall panel for a suite to come out and put a new one in. You're usually looking at a $200 to $400 project.